After the divorce, my ex-husband launched a business with the woman he'd been seeing behind my back and made sure I received a personal invitation to the grand opening. It wasn't kindness. It was a performance, a carefully staged moment so he could prove he'd won. I showed up without a word. I stood quietly off to the side while they basked in congratulations, accepting handshakes, posing for photos, glowing under the warm lights of success. She clung to his arm like a trophy. He laughed louder than necessary, making sure I could hear it. And then the main sponsor of the evening walked straight toward me. He smiled, leaned in as if we shared a private secret, and said, "Darling, this is the company you wanted, isn't it?" Welcome to the channel Twists of Fate. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. We truly love knowing how far our stories travel. Sit back and enjoy this captivating story. Ksenia met Mitri during their third year of college in the university cafeteria. She was sitting alone by the window, her macroeconomics notebook spread open in front of her, absently poking at a plate of cold fries. Numbers filled the page, projections, models, calculations. She was deep in concentration. He sat down across from her without asking, set his tray down, studied her for a second. "You're staring at that notebook like it holds the secret to eternal life," he said with a grin. "Care to share?" She looked up. A guy with a wide, confident smile sat there, his shirt slightly wrinkled, his expression suggesting the world personally belonged to him. She meant to reply with something sharp, something clever, but instead she laughed. That's how it started. She was an economics major. He studied law. Their departments were in neighboring buildings, and within a week, Dmitri was waiting for her every morning by the entrance, holding out a paper cup of vending machine coffee. The coffee was terrible, bitter, metallic, undrinkable. Years later, Ksenia confessed to her friend Lena that she used to pour it down the restroom sink. But the gesture, the way he stood there every morning, in any weather, holding that ridiculous cup, that was what hooked her. They were so different that their friends were genuinely puzzled by how it worked. Ksenia grew up in a small town. Her mother was a school teacher. Her father drove a bus. Their home was quiet. The television was turned on only for the news. On Sundays, her mom baked cabbage pies and laid out playing cards at the kitchen table. Ksenia learned to value silence. She thought before she spoke, weighed her words like coins in her palm. At gatherings, she usually sat at the edge, listening, and when she did say something, it was brief, but it carried enough weight to make the room go still. Dmitri was her complete opposite. He came from a big city family. His father ran 2 small auto repair shops. His mother was a retired accountant. Their house was loud. The television blared in 3 rooms at once. Conversations overlapped. Laughter echoed. Dmitri thrived at the center of attention. He told jokes so well the entire dorm floor would erupt in laughter. He argued with professors not because he knew more, but because he loved the performance. Standing there, gesturing, feeling every eye on him, what drew them together was that very contrast. Beside Ksenia, Dmitri became just a little deeper, a little more thoughtful. Beside him, she became braver, freer. They fit together like 2 parts of the same machine. At first, it worked flawlessly. They got married a year after graduation. The wedding was small, 30 guests and a calf on the edge of town, her mother's pie instead of a cake. Ksenia's father wore his only suit, faintly scented with mothballs, and the year 1993. Dmitri had wanted something grand, something dazzling, but there wasn't money for that. "Dim," Ksenia said gently, "a wedding is one day. Let's save for a down payment on an apartment instead." He agreed, though later, more than once, he would bring it up, with a trace of resentment, imagining how spectacular it could have been. They rented a tiny 1-bedroom apartment, an old building, an elevator that worked when it felt like it, a neighbor upstairs who blasted her television every night. Ksenia made it cozy, hung curtains, placed 3 pots of violets on the windowsill, bought an old armchair at a flea market, and reupholstered it herself after watching online tutorials. In the evenings, they sat in the kitchen, Ksenia at her laptop, spreadsheets glowing on the screen, Dmitri across from her, mug of tea in hand, unveiling his next grand idea. He always had ideas. At first, that was what she loved most about him, that restless energy, that constant what if. One week, he was obsessed with launching a food delivery app. The next, he wanted to open a co-working space. Then he was researching a barbershop franchise. Every time, he would sit across from her, spread napkins on the table covered in sketched-out diagrams, and say, "Kesu, you'll see. I'm going to build something big. I just need the right moment." Ksenia would nod, open Excel, and start calculating. For her, numbers weren't abstract. They were a language: rent per month, break-even point, client volume needed, first-year survival rate for similar businesses. Reality lived inside those rows and columns. Each time she turned the laptop toward him with the final table, he would squint as if she'd handed him a lemon. "You only ever see problems," he'd say. "You don't believe in me." She did believe in him, just not in imaginary math. The first attempt, the delivery app, collapsed when his former classmate and partner took the developer's advance payment and vanished. The second, the co-working space, fell apart when they discovered the building they'd chosen was scheduled for demolition in 3 months. The third, the franchise, never launched because they were $200,000 short of the entry fee. Every failure hit Dmitry hard. He slammed doors, stayed silent for 2 days, stormed around the apartment like a wounded general, and then, without fail, he would return to the kitchen, sit down across from her. "Okay," he'd say, forcing a grin. That wasn't the one. But the next idea? "The next one is going to explode." Ksenia endured not because she was naturally patient, but because she loved him, or at least she thought she did. Years later, she could no longer clearly tell where love had ended and habit had begun. Meanwhile, her own career was rising, quietly, steadily, without drama. Right after graduation, she joined a consulting firm as a financial analyst. 2 years later, she became a senior analyst. After 4, she was heading her department. Management valued her for one simple reason: Ksenia never guessed. She calculated. Her reports were so precise that clients began requesting that girl with the charts to personally oversee their projects. She didn't speak at conferences. She didn't run a social media blog. She didn't pose for photos with inspirational slogans about being a woman in business. She just worked. Dmitry reacted to her success in a strange way. He wasn't angry. He simply didn't notice. When she got promoted and came home with a bottle of wine to celebrate, he said, "That's great, Xu. Hey, I've been thinking, what about opening a shawarma stand?" "No, seriously, those stands near train stations? They're a gold mine." She set the bottle on the table, took out 2 glasses, drank hers alone, and said nothing. In their 6th year of marriage, Dmitry took a job as a lawyer at a real estate development company. The work was fine: contracts, approvals, occasional minor court disputes. The pay was decent, though not as much as he believed he deserved. But the most important thing wasn't the salary. The most important thing was that Regina worked there. Regina Maslova, sales manager, 28 years old, long burgundy acrylic nails, waist-length hair, perfume that lingered down the entire hallway, the kind of woman who walks into a room and makes every man instinctively straighten his posture. She wasn't a classic beauty. She was something else: bright, magnetic, impossible not to notice. She had a laugh that sounded genuine even when she didn't care at all. Regina had one real talent: she could instantly sense what someone wanted to hear, and she would say exactly that. With clients, it worked flawlessly. She sold apartments in half-built complexes as if she were offering suites at a 5-star resort. With men, it worked even better. At their first corporate party together, she told Dmitry, "You're probably the most interesting man in this office. Why are you stuck in the legal department? With your charisma, you should have your own business." He laughed. But he remembered, and Regina remembered his reaction. After that, everything unfolded in a pattern Ksenia would later reconstruct the way an analyst reconstructs events from raw data. First, they started having lunch together in the company cafeteria, then coffee after work, then business dinners where work wasn't discussed at all. Regina listened to Dmitry the way he had always dreamed of being listened to. She nodded, admired him, said, "Dima, you're completely underestimated. You're a genius. You just need a woman who truly believes in you. Truly believes. Not one who sits with a calculator explaining why something won't work." Ksenia didn't notice the changes immediately. The first warning sign was the late nights. Dmitry had always come home by 7. He used to say his brain shut off after 6. Suddenly, he started arriving at 9, then 10. Meeting ran long, A client needed revisions. Stopped by Misha's place. Haven't seen him in ages. Then there was the cologne. For years he wore the same simple, fresh scent Ksenia had given him for their first anniversary. One day a black bottle appeared on the bathroom shelf. The fragrance was heavy, sweet, almost too mature for him. Then came the phone. He used to leave it everywhere, on the kitchen table, on the armrest of the couch, sometimes forgotten in his jacket pocket. Now it always lay face down. And whenever Ksenia entered the room, Dmitri instinctively slipped it into his pocket. She didn't make a scene. She didn't check his phone at night. She didn't hire a private investigator. She didn't cry to a friend over the phone. Ksenia did what she did best. She gathered data. One evening, while Dmitri was once again stuck at a meeting, she opened their banking app and reviewed the last month's transactions on their joint card. Restaurant Toscana, dinner for two, $7,800. Pine Coast Hotel in the suburbs, $12,000 for one night. Jewelry store, $34,000. Ksenia looked down at her own hand. Her wedding ring, thin gold. Dmitri had bought it 8 years ago for the equivalent of 3,000 rubles in a subway passage. He had never given her another ring. She closed the app, stood up, walked to the window. Outside was an ordinary evening. Streetlights, wet asphalt, someone struggling to parallel park on the sidewalk. The violets on the windowsill were dry. She had forgotten to water them. Or maybe she hadn't forgotten. Maybe she had simply stopped noticing. Ksenia filed for divorce a week later. She found a lawyer through a colleague, prepared the paperwork, divided the shared accounts. When everything was ready, she placed the folder on the kitchen table, the same spot where Dmitri used to spread out his napkin business plans, and waited for him to come home. He came home around 10:30. He smelled of that same black perfume, sweet, heavy, and like it didn't belong to their life anymore. Ksenia was sitting at the table. In front of her stood a mug of tea that had long gone cold. "What's this?" he asked when he noticed the folder. "Divorce papers," she said. "Please sign them." He froze in the kitchen doorway, one hand still gripping the handle, staring at her as if she had spoken in a foreign language. He had been ready for anything. Tears, shouting, accusations. He had rehearsed his answers in advance. "You're imagining things. There's nothing between us. You're just jealous." Because... But Ksenia didn't shout. She didn't cry. She sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, looking at him with the same calm focus she used when studying a spreadsheet where every number finally added up. "Sign them, Dima. I won't keep you next to me by force." He signed that very evening. Maybe out of confusion. Maybe out of relief that he no longer had to hide his phone or invent late meetings. Or maybe because in his mind he was already living a different life. One where, instead of quiet Ksenia with her charts, there was bright, vivid Regina with her admiring eyes. 3 days later, Dmitri took his things, 2 bags and a box of business books he had bought but never finished reading. Ksenia didn't see him off. She sat in the armchair, the one she had reupholstered herself, and listened to the front door slam shut. Then she picked up her phone, opened Lena's contact, and typed, "I'm divorced." A minute later came the reply, "I'll be there in an hour." With wine or without. With wine. And with pie if you can, Ksenia answered. Lena arrived with 2 bottles of red and a store-bought pie. They sat in the kitchen until 2 in the morning. Ksenia told her everything, about the card, the hotel, the jewelry store. She didn't cry once. Lena cried for both of them. Meanwhile, Dmitri was telling his version of the story to mutual friends, former classmates, colleagues, anyone willing to listen. In his version, he had left on his own. "Ksyusha is a good person, but she suffocated me. Control, control, control. She counted every penny, didn't believe in any of my ideas. I just couldn't grow next to her. I needed someone who supports me, not holds me back." Some nodded, some looked away. When Lena heard this version from a mutual acquaintance, she slammed her fist on the caf table so hard she knocked over her latte and said, "The nerve of him." 3 months after the divorce, Dmitri and Regina were already living together. They rented a 2-bedroom apartment with a view of a construction site, but with fresh renovations and a huge bathroom where Regina lined up 23 jars of face cream. 2 months later, Dmitry wrote in the group chat of former classmates' friends, happy to announce that I'm launching my own business, a premium network of manicure and cosmetology studios. The idea belongs to my beloved woman. The execution is mine. Opening soon. Everyone's invited. Lena sent Ksenia a screenshot. Ksenia read it, stared at the screen for a few seconds, and set the phone aside. Then she turned back to her laptop, where a file with tables, charts, and financial forecasts was open, and continued working. Not a single muscle in her face moved. But at the corner of her mouth, if someone had been watching very closely, you might have noticed a faint shadow of a smile. Brief, almost invisible, like a shadow slipping behind a cloud. What Dmitry didn't know, and couldn't have known, had begun long before he signed those divorce papers. A year and a half before the breakup, at the end of October, Ksenia was invited to a business conference by Marina, a colleague from a neighboring department. The event took place in the capital, at the Bolshoi Hotel, and carried the grand name Investment Horizons. At first, Ksenia declined. It was Saturday, she wanted to sleep in, and the program looked standard. Speakers with polished slides, coffee breaks, business cards tucked into suit pockets. But Marina insisted. Ksen, there will be real investors there, not those bloggers selling courses about successful success. Let's go, at least to listen. Ksenia agreed. She put on a gray blazer, tied her hair back into a ponytail, and took a notebook with her. She preferred writing by hand, believing the information settled better in her mind that way. The conference turned out to be better than she expected. One of the speakers, a woman from a venture fund, spoke about valuing service businesses so clearly that Ksenia filled 4 pages with notes. During the lunch break, the organizers seated participants at round tables, 8 people each, so networking would happen organically as stated in the program. Ksenia ended up at a table by the window between Marina and a man in his early 40s. He was leaning back in his chair, reading something on his phone. He wore a dark blue blazer without a tie, a simple watch, and the expression of someone who was used to listening more than talking. Marina, as always, was the first to strike up a conversation. She was the kind of person who could get a street lamp talking in 5 minutes. "And what field are you in?" she asked, leaning toward him with a friendly smile. He put his phone away, looked at Marina, and calmly replied, "Investments. A fund that works with franchises and service-based models? Ooh, how interesting. And this is Ksenia." Marina nodded toward her, as if presenting a daughter at a formal introduction. "She's an analyst, knows everything about numbers." Ksenia blushed slightly and was about to say something neutral, but the man turned to her and held out his hand. Artem Velikov. The name meant nothing to her. Later, when she typed it into a search engine, she discovered there was almost no public information about him. No interviews, no photos from forums, no social media profiles with motivational quotes against a sunset, only dry mentions in business publications. Velikov's fund entered the capital. An investment group under A. Velikov acquired a stake. He was one of those people who never appeared in society columns, but whom everyone dealing with serious money knew. They talked over lunch. It started professionally. Ksenia mentioned that she had analyzed the food service franchise market for a client and found that 90% of the business plans brought to her were built on inflated traffic expectations. Artem listened without interrupting, then asked 3 questions, precise, focused, the kind only someone who truly understood the subject would ask. Ksenia answered. He nodded and said a sentence she remembered word for word. "You have an analytical mind that's rare. You don't just see numbers, you see the stories behind them. That's worth more than any mba." Ksenia didn't know how to respond. In 8 years, Dmitry had never said anything like that to her. He praised her borscht, praised a new hairstyle, praised her with mild surprise when she received a bonus, but the essence of what she did, the things she was proud of, he seemed never to truly see. And this stranger at a conference lunch table had seen it in 20 minutes. They exchanged contacts. Artem gave her a simple business card, white cardstock. Name, phone number, email address. No logo, no slogan, no gold embossing. Ksenia slipped the card into her notebook and forgot about it for 3 weeks. Then he wrote first. A short email. "Good afternoon, Ksenia. Our fund is exploring service business niches in the regions. I'd be interested in your opinion on a couple of questions if you have the time. Artem. She replied that same evening. A correspondence began. For the first 2 months, they communicated strictly about work. Artem sent her market data. She sent back comments and calculations. He valued her ability to find a weak spot in a business model in half an hour, something his analysts might spend a week on. She valued that he never tried to sound smarter than he was, never interrupted, never started sentences with "well, actually." Gradually, the conversations widened. One day, Artem called. By then, they had already moved to phone calls, and he asked about another project. Ksenia didn't answer right away. A pause hung in the line. "Are you busy?" he asked. "No," she said. "Just a hard day." He didn't ask what had happened. He simply said, "If you want to talk about something other than work, I'm listening. If not, that's fine too." She didn't want to, not that evening. But a week later, after yet another night when Dmitry came home at 11, didn't ask how her day was, took a shower, and went to bed facing the wall, Ksenia dialed Artem's number. It was 10 in the evening. He picked up after the second ring. "Artem, you said we could talk about things other than work?" "Of course. I'm on the terrace, drinking tea. I'm listening." And she told him everything. Not all at once, piece by piece. Carefully, like someone who was saying out loud for the first time what she had known for a long time, about a husband who looked in another direction, about the feeling of living alone in an apartment even though she slept next to someone every night, about being tired of being the foundation for someone else's ambitions that never became anything more than conversations at the kitchen table. Artem listened. He didn't comfort her. He didn't give advice. He didn't say, "Leave him," and he didn't say, "Be patient." He simply listened and sometimes asked a quiet question that made Ksenia fall silent, think, and realize something new about herself. There was nothing between them. Ksenia was married, and for her, that meant everything. No meetings, no hints, no ambiguous messages. Artem didn't cross the line either. He had been divorced for 5 years, but he wasn't the kind of man who circled around someone else's wife, waiting for the right moment. Just two adults who found in each other what they were missing. For Ksenia, it was space where she was heard. For Artem, it was a person with whom he could think out loud. When Ksenia got divorced, Artem learned about it from her. She called him during her lunch break, standing on the office stairwell, and said, "I filed for divorce." "He signed?" Artem asked. "Yes." He was silent for a second, then said, "How are you?" Strangely, like pulling out a splinter that's been there so long you got used to the pain and forgot it could be gone, he didn't rush into courting. He didn't send flowers. He didn't invite her to dinner. He didn't start calling every day. He did something else, something far more necessary. 2 days later, he recommended a lawyer to help her with the property division. A week after that, he offered her project-based work with his fund. "I have several niches that need deep analysis. The pay is good, remote work, flexible schedule. If you're interested, I'll send the terms." Ksenia agreed. Not for the money, though money wasn't unnecessary after the divorce. She stayed in a rented one-room apartment from which Dmitry had taken the TV and the coffee machine, but left behind a box of his unread business books. She agreed because she needed to occupy her mind with something other than the thought of how 8 years of life had turned into 2 bags and the sound of a door slamming shut. Working with Artem's fund turned out to be exactly what she needed. Complex challenges, real markets. Big numbers. Ksenia analyzed promising investment niches, everything from car wash chains to private medical clinics. She prepared every report as if her life depended on it, with a level of detail that surprised even the senior analysts at the fund. The third project on her list was the beauty services market. She immersed herself in it completely, and after just 2 weeks, she realized she had uncovered something extraordinary. A gold mine. The premium manicure and cosmetology studio segment in major metropolitan cities was drastically undervalued. Existing salons fell into 2 predictable categories: cheap basement spots with technicians working on commission, or rare luxury locations with price tags far beyond what most clients could afford. There was almost no middle ground, no high-quality service at a reasonable price, no unified standards, no recognizable brand people could trust. Ksenia wrote a 40-page business plan. Locations not in the expensive city centers, but in densely populated residential neighborhoods filled with her target audience, women aged 25 to 45, working professionals with above-average income. She built a financial model with 3 scenarios: pessimistic, base, and optimistic. In the base case, projected break-even 14 months. Her marketing strategy avoided flashy social media ads. Instead, she proposed strategic partnerships with fitness clubs and medical centers, places her clients already trusted. Artyom read the report in one evening. The next morning, he called. "This is strong, one of the best projects I've seen in the past 3 years. If I invest, will you run it?" By that time, they had already started addressing each other informally. It had happened naturally after one long late-night phone conversation when Ksenia told him about her mother's cabbage pies, and he shared stories about his grandfather rebuilding a factory in Sverdlovsk with his bare hands after the war. "Wait," Ksenia said calmly. "I have an idea. Just give me a week to think." For 7 days she paced her apartment. She brewed tea and let it go cold while staring out the window. She opened her laptop, ran numbers, closed it again, walked in circles, thinking. On the 4th day, she sat down at her kitchen table, in the very seat where Dmitry once sat sketching business ideas on napkins, and everything suddenly clicked into place. She knew Dmitry dreamed of owning a business. She knew Regina moved within the beauty industry, working as an administrator at a salon owned by a development company. She also knew something far more important. For all his ambition, energy, and charisma, Dmitry understood nothing about financial planning or operational management. He could sell an idea, he could ignite a room. He had the kind of presence that made people turn their heads the moment he walked in. But building a system that functioned without him, creating structure, discipline, long-term stability, that wasn't his strength. Strategically, he was weak, and she knew it better than anyone. For 8 years, she had sat across from him, reviewing his business plans, watching the same pattern repeat itself, beautiful dreams scribbled on napkins, but no skeleton underneath. Ksenia called Artyom and presented her proposal. Her voice was steady and professional, the same tone she used when delivering reports to clients. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, there was a pause. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly. "Absolutely." The plan was simple, elegant, like a flawless financial model. Through a mutual acquaintance of Artyom's, a restaurateur named Rustem Karimov, the idea would reach Dmitry in a way that felt accidental, organic, as if it had been his own discovery. Rustem knew Dmitry through mutual friends. They happened to cross paths at a birthday party. There were drinks, laughter, casual conversation. Rustem, charming and talkative, steered the discussion effortlessly. "Dima, I've been looking at the beauty market. It's practically empty. No solid chain manicure studios. Whoever enters first will take the whole market." Dmitry immediately leaned in. Regina, standing beside him with a glass of Prosecco, jumped into the conversation. "I've told you 100 times, beauty is gold." Rustem promised to send over some preliminary numbers his team had put together. The numbers, of course, were Ksenia's, carefully prepared, accurate, but formatted on neutral letterhead with no author listed. When Dmitry opened the file, something lit up inside him like never before. The figures were convincing because they were real. The niche was real because Ksenia had uncovered it through cold, methodical analysis, not intuition. Through Rustem, Dmitry was introduced to an investment company, Vector Capital, a perfectly ordinary name, just another investment structure among dozens like it. Behind it stood Artyom's fund. The terms offered to Dmitry seemed almost unbelievable. Full launch financing, rent, renovations, equipment, marketing, in exchange for a minority stake. "We believe in this project," the fund's representative said during the meeting. "We're ready to provide everything you need to get started. We just need confidence that operational management will be strong." Dmitry was glowing. That evening, he arrived at Regina's apartment with a bottle of champagne and a box of sushi. "Reginka, we did it," he said, barely containing his excitement. "We found an investor. Full financing. Can you imagine? Full." Regina screamed with joy, jumped around the room, spilled champagne on the carpet, and immediately began sketching a logo for their future studio on her phone. By midnight, she had come up with a name, Regina Beauty. Dmitry didn't object. What mattered to him now was something far more important. For the first time in his life, he was building something of his own. A real business. Real money. The investment agreement was 24 pages long. He received it 3 days before the signing. Regina leaned over his shoulder, glanced at the dense fine print, and said lightly, "Dim, you're the lawyer. You know this stuff better than anyone. Just sign it. Don't drag it out, or they might change their minds." He flipped through it. He didn't read it. He flipped. His eyes caught the key numbers, the investment amount, the deadlines, his share. Everything looked good, more than good. But buried in the paragraphs he skimmed were the details. The management company would be appointed by the investor. If key performance indicators weren't met within the first 6 months, full operational control would transfer to the investor. Major decisions would require approval from a 3-member board, 2 of those seats appointed by the investor. Executive hires would be coordinated with the management company. Brand usage would be governed by a separate licensing agreement. Dimitri signed with a sleek, expensive pen, his signature wide and confident, like a man who believed he had finally harnessed his luck. He was certain he had built everything himself, found the niche, attracted the investor, shaped the concept. His name stood proudly on the sign outside. His photo smiled from the website under the title Founder. His dream, 8 long years in the making, scattered across a dozen failed ideas, now had walls, furniture, a glowing sign, and a working cash register. What he didn't know was that every step of his journey, from a casual conversation with Rustam to the final signature, had been calculated by a woman sitting in a small rented apartment at a table where his old napkins covered in business sketches once lay. A woman who had spent 8 years analyzing other people's business plans before finally writing her own. Meanwhile, Ksenia was doing what she did best, working quietly, methodically, without unnecessary words. She coordinated renovations for the future studio through the structure of the investment fund, so Dmitri saw only final invoices. She selected equipment by comparing suppliers across 6 separate criteria. She built a system designed to run like clockwork, no matter whose name was displayed on the front sign. In the evenings, Artem called her. Sometimes they talked about business, sometimes they didn't. He told her about his daughter, who was studying architecture, and called him every Sunday at exactly 10:00 a.m. She told him how she had finally repotted the violets on her windowsill and how they had bloomed for the first time in 2 years. Something was growing between them, but they were both too mature and too careful to rush it. One evening, during a quiet phone call, Artem asked, "Don't you think this is a bit complicated? You could have just opened the business in your own name." Ksenia was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "I could have, but then it would have been just another company. This isn't a lesson for him, it's for me. I needed to prove to myself that I can build something real, and that the person who once failed to see my value would step onto my foundation on his own. Not because I lured him there, but because the foundation is solid." Artem paused before answering softly, "You're the most remarkable person I've ever met." Ksenia smiled into the darkness of her apartment. On the windowsill, the violets were blooming. On the table, her laptop screen glowed with a spreadsheet where every number stood precisely in its place. The invitation arrived on a Thursday evening. Ksenia was lying on the couch with a book. Recently, she had returned to reading, something she hadn't done in years while living with Dmitri. Back then, evenings had been consumed by his ideas, his conversations, his plans. Now, the evenings belonged to her. The silence wasn't empty. It was full. Her phone chimed. A message from Dmitri. They hadn't spoken since the divorce. No calls, no messages. Just once he had texted about a jacket he'd left behind, and she had placed it in a bag outside the door. But this message was long, deliberately casual, written in that particular tone she would recognize anywhere. He was boasting. "Hey Q, long time no talk. This Saturday is the grand opening of my premium beauty studio. You should come if you want. It'll be interesting. I think it might be useful for you to see that some of my ideas actually turned into something worthwhile. I'll send the address later." Ksenia read the message twice. She set the book on the armrest and stared at the ceiling. Outside, the late October evening hummed with city noise. Somewhere below, teenagers played music on a bench, the bass pulsing faintly through the glass. She read it again. "My ideas. Useful for you to see. Two smiley faces made of parentheses, Dimitri's signature mark whenever he thought he was especially clever. She picked up her phone and called Lena. Len, you won't believe this. Dima invited me to the opening of his business. On the other end, Lena nearly choked on her tea. You're kidding. The nerve. What are you going to say? I'm going... Ksenia, have you lost your mind? Why would you do that? Stand there and watch him with Regina pretending to be some perfect business couple? Smile at all those people who bought his version of the story, that he left because you were holding him back? Ksenia stood up from the couch and walked to the window. She gently adjusted the pot of the violet that had tilted slightly to one side. Len, I need to be there. Just trust me. Lena went quiet. She had known Ksenia for 20 years, since their very first year of college, since the dorm days, back when they boiled pasta in an electric kettle and dried laundry on the radiator. Over time, she had learned to hear every shade in Ksenia's voice. Right now, there was no hurt in it, no anxiety. There was something else, calm certainty, like the silence just before sunrise. All right, Lena said at last, but if that clown says even one rude word to you, I'll come over and dump punch on his head. There'll be punch, Ksenia smiled, catering. I'm sure we'll find something. She hung up and texted Dimitri a single word, I'll come, no emojis. No exclamation points. No explanations. The next day, Lena called again. Her voice was indignant, though that was her natural state. Kasen, I ran into Natasha. You remember her, right? From law school. She studied with Dima. Yes. Well, she says he's telling everyone about the opening, calling people personally. And you know what he's saying about you? I know, Ksenia replied calmly, that he wants you to come and see what he achieved without you, that you held him back, and now you should look and finally understand where your place is. Did Natasha call you too? No. I just know Dima. 8 years, Len. I can predict his words down to the comma. Lena snorted. And that doesn't bother you? Ksenia paused for a second. No. Not anymore. On Friday evening, she called Artyom. He picked up after the first ring. He almost always did, as if he kept his phone ready, waiting for the moment she might call. The opening is tomorrow, she said. I know. I got an invitation too, like any proper investor. Are you going? Are you? Yes. He invited me. Personally, Artyom was silent. She could hear something rustling in the background, pages, maybe a book or documents. Ksenia, are you sure you want to do it this way? We could have handled it quietly. Paperwork, lawyers, a clean restructuring. He'd get the notices, sign everything, and that would be it. We could, she agreed. But he invited me himself. He wants me standing in the corner, watching his triumph. I won't deny him that pleasure. Artyom chuckled softly, briefly, like someone who had just appreciated a clever chess move. Then I'll come too. Modestly, she added, like an investor should, Artyom, just one thing. Don't arrange anything on purpose. If he doesn't invite you to the microphone himself, just stay aside. I don't want a circus. I want everything to happen naturally, deal. Saturday morning was sunny, almost unnaturally so for late October. Ksenia woke up at 6, even though the event didn't start until 7 in the evening. She drank her coffee standing by the window. The sky was clear and transparent, like glass. On the windowsill, 3 pots of violets, purple, white, and pink, had opened their petals toward the light. She touched the soil with her finger. It was still damp. She had watered them yesterday. The day passed quietly. She cleaned the apartment, did laundry, went to the store for groceries, bread, milk, tomatoes, a packet of buckwheat. At the checkout, an elderly cashier smiled at her and said, "Miss, you look so radiant today." Ksenia smiled back and thought that this might be the first compliment in a long time that felt truly sincere. At 5, she started getting ready. She opened the closet, nearly empty after the divorce. She hadn't been buying clothes, making do with what she had. She took out a black dress, simple straight cut, just below the knee. She had bought it on sale 2 years ago and worn it only 3 times, once to a company party, once to Lena's birthday and once to a job interview. The dress fit perfectly, not tight, not loose, simply framing her figure the way a frame holds a painting. No sparkle, no slits, no statements. Exactly what was needed. She gathered her hair into a low knot, small silver drop earrings, a gift from her mother for her 30th birthday, mascara, lipstick in a natural shade, just a touch of blush. She looked at herself in the hallway mirror, old, with a darkened frame left behind by previous tenants. A woman looked back at her, one who knew exactly where she was going and why. The taxi arrived at 6:30. The driver, an older man with a mustache and a radio tuned to retro hits, drove her through the evening city. The city glowed with lights, shop windows, billboards, the red trails of cars ahead. A familiar song played through the speakers. And suddenly, Ksenia remembered her mother playing that song in the kitchen while washing dishes after dinner. She remembered the smell of cabbage pies. She remembered sitting at the table as a little girl, notebook open, thinking that when she grew up she would build something of her own. Not a house, back then she didn't yet know what exactly, just something that would belong to her. The boutique Renaissance Hotel stood in a narrow lane downtown, an Art Nouveau building with tall windows and a wrought iron canopy over the entrance. By the doors, a young man in black greeted guests, offering champagne, the glasses held delicately at eye level. Ksenia picked up a glass of water. The hall on the second floor was decorated in beige and gold tones. White tablecloths draped over the tables, tall candle holders flickered softly, and near the entrance stood a sleek display with the Regina Beauty logo, gold letters against a black background. There was a photo zone filled with flowers and a neon sign that read Dream. Ksenia lingered on that word for a moment. Regina had probably found it on Pinterest. There were a lot of people, around 70, Ksenia estimated as her gaze moved across the room. Men in tailored suits, women in evening gowns, a few girls with professional cameras and ring lights, bloggers Regina had invited to generate content. In the corner, a DJ played low, smooth lounge music. The bar was crowded with guests waiting for cocktails. Mitri stood in the center of it all. A new dark blue fitted suit, clearly bought for tonight, a crisp white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, shoes polished so perfectly they reflected the light like mirrors. He looked good. Ksenia acknowledged it without jealousy, without resistance, the way you accept an obvious fact. Dmitri had always known how to present himself. Next to him stood Regina. A powder-colored gown, long, with an open back and a slit up to the thigh. Her hairstyle was an intricate construction of curls that must have taken 3 hours in a salon chair. Diamond earrings sparkled at her ears, the same pair from the jewelry store, the ones that cost $34,000 from the joint account. Ksenia recognized the shape of the pendants. She had seen them on the store's website while reviewing the bank statement. Strangely, now it stirred nothing but mild surprise. So little time had passed, and yet those earrings already felt like a detail from someone else's life. She moved deeper into the hall and stopped by the far wall near a window overlooking the courtyard. From there, she could see everything, while remaining half in shadow herself. She took a sip of water and scanned the room. She recognized a few people. Dmitri's former classmates, Sergei Malikov, who laughed too loudly and never remembered names. Eliza Chernyeva, with whom they once went to the movies as a group of 4. There were unfamiliar faces too, Regina's colleagues, business partners, men wearing expensive watches and holding glasses of whiskey. Everyone looked festive, energized, like at a New Year's corporate party before the awkward games begin. Dmitri didn't notice her right away. He was busy shaking hands, hugging guests, posing for photos. To every newcomer, he repeated the same message, slightly adjusting the wording. "So glad you came." Finally, the dream is reality. Yes, I came up with it myself, found the investors myself. Of course, Regina inspired me. Regina smiled beside him and adjusted her curls. About 20 minutes after Ksenia arrived, Dmitri finally saw her. She stood against the wall in her simple black dress, holding a glass of water. Amid the glitter and gold of the hall, she looked like a pencil sketch hanging among bright oil paintings, and yet something about that simplicity drew attention, perhaps the calm she radiated. Not forced, not performed, real. He walked over. The expression on his face was one she knew by heart, satisfaction with a shade of condescension. The look he wore when he won an argument, when he turned out to be right about something small, when he felt superior. Ksyusha, glad you came. He leaned in as if to kiss her cheek, but stopped when he sensed she hadn't moved toward him. So? What do you think? He swept his arm across the hall like a tour guide presenting a city skyline. There. I made the dream happen. Too bad you didn't believe in it. Ksenia looked at him, not down, not away, directly into his eyes, for several seconds. Then she said evenly, without a trace of emotion, "Congratulations. You did everything beautifully." He had expected something else. Admiration, confusion, maybe even envy. Perhaps what he wanted most was regret, something that would confirm his version of the story. She didn't believe. She held him back, and now she could stand there and watch. But there was only calm in her voice. And that calm was worse than any scream. He opened his mouth to add something, to underline his victory, to drive in another nail, but from across the hall Regina called out, "Dima, come here. Andrei Viktorovich just arrived." Dmitri glanced back at Ksenia, nodded with the air of a man who had won, and walked away. Ksenia stayed by the wall, finished her water, and placed the glass on the windowsill. People approached her one by one, cautiously the way you approach someone at a wake. Eliza Chernaeva hugged her and whispered, "Ksyusha, you're strong for coming." I couldn't have. Sergei Malikov, already slightly tipsy, clapped her on the shoulder. "Ksen, you're stunning. It's his loss." Natasha from law school looked at her sympathetically and asked quietly, "How are you holding up?" Ksenia gave everyone the same response, a small nod, a faint smile at the corner of her lips. "I'm fine. Thank you." Around 9 in the evening, someone cut the music. The DJ stepped away from his console. Waiters froze mid-step with trays in their hands. Dmitri walked to the microphone, set up on a small raised platform by the far wall, an improvised stage decorated with flowers and the same Regina Beauty logo. He cleared his throat, tapped the microphone with his finger, and smiled at the room. The crowd quieted. "Friends," he began, his voice blending solemnity with carefully crafted modesty, "I won't take long. Although, that's a lie. I will. You know me." Laughter rippled through the room. Dmitri straightened his shoulders. "Today is a special day for me. A day I've been working toward for many years. There were doubts. There were challenges. There were people who said I wouldn't make it." He didn't look at Ksenia. He was far too experienced as a speaker to reveal the direction of his aim. But several guests turned their heads toward her anyway. She stood perfectly still. "But I believed in myself," he continued. "And I was lucky to have people beside me who believed too. First and foremost, my team. You guys are the best. And of course, my main inspiration, my partner in everything, Regina." Regina stood in the front row, hands pressed to her chest like an actress accepting an award. Her eyes shimmered, whether from the spotlights, the champagne, or the thrill of seeing her name glowing in gold on the sign. It was hard to tell. "Regina, you're my muse. Without you, this project would never have been born. You believed in me when others doubted. Thank you." Applause burst out. Regina blew a kiss into the crowd. Dmitri paused, took a sip of water from the glass on the counter, and continued. "And I'd also like to thank our investors who believed in our idea and supported us. Without them, none of this would have been possible. Artem Igorovich, if you're here, please come up and say a few words." I think our guests would be interested in hearing from the person behind the financial side of this project. The room stirred. Everyone knew serious money stood behind the studio, the renovation, the equipment, the prime location. People had whispered about the budget. One former lawyer couldn't have carried that alone. But no one had really seen the investor. Rustam, standing at the bar with a glass in his hand, allowed himself the faintest smile. From the far corner of the room, along the wall opposite where Ksenia stood, a man rose. Tall, gray suit, no tie, calm face, dark hair touched with silver at the temples. He moved through the crowd unhurriedly, and people stepped aside without being asked. Artem Velikov. He walked toward the stage, toward the microphone, toward Dmitri, who waited above with the welcoming smile of a host prepared to receive gratitude from the right person. But halfway there, Artem stopped. He stopped near the wall, by the window overlooking the courtyard, where Ksenia was standing. The room froze, not instantly. First the ones closest fell silent. Then the quiet spread in waves, like ripples across water. Conversations faded, glasses paused midair, even the server stopped moving. Artem turned to Ksenia. He looked at her, and his usually restrained, professional expression changed. He smiled. Warmly, openly. The kind of smile reserved for someone chosen, someone known, someone awaited. He placed his hand gently but confidently on her shoulder and said, clearly enough for every person in the silent room to hear, "My love, is this the company you wanted?" Silence. Complete. Ringing. The kind that presses against your ears. 70 people stood motionless, staring at the two by the wall. Dmitri remained at the microphone. The hand holding his water glass froze halfway up. The broad, owner's smile that had lit his face seconds earlier slowly drained away. Beside the stage, Regina's color visibly faded. The tan she had carefully perfected 2 days earlier now looked like a separate layer, orange, artificial, like a mask forgotten on too long. Ksenia looked at Artem. Then at the room. 70 pairs of eyes, 70 held breaths. Dmitri at the microphone, Regina near the stage, the logo in gold letters against black, the neon DMK glowing above the photo wall. She turned back to Artem and said calmly, in that same steady voice she had once used when placing divorce papers in front of Dmitri, "Yes, this one." Artem nodded like a man confirming data he had never doubted. Then he turned to the room and said evenly, "I suppose I should say the few words Dmitri Sergeyevich requested." "May I have the microphone?" A young staff member in a black apron hurried forward with a wireless mic. Artem took it the way one takes a tool, without theatrics, without pause. He spoke briefly and directly, as he always did. No dramatic flourishes, no emotional detours. The impact didn't need help. "I'll keep this short since I was invited. From the very first figure in the business plan to the selection of this location, this project was developed by Ksenia Andreevna. The concept, the financial model, the marketing strategy, the property selection, every part of it is her work. My fund invested because she convinced me the niche had strong potential. She was right. The project reached its target metrics before the official opening." He paused. Not a single person in the room moved. Under the terms of the investment agreement, which Dmitri Sergeyevich signed voluntarily, the management company is appointed by the investor. That company has already been appointed. It is headed by Ksenia Andreevna. From this moment forward, all operational decisions go through her. This isn't a surprise. It isn't a takeover. It's simply the contract, clearly stated in black and white across 24 pages. The microphone slipped from Dmitri's hand, the one closest to the stage, and hit the floor with a dull thud that cracked through the silence like a gunshot. Dmitri didn't seem to notice. He was staring at Artyom, at Ksenia, at Artyom's hand resting on her shoulder, unable to piece the image together, like a puzzle where every piece suddenly belonged to a different box. He lunged forward, jumped down from the platform, shoving people aside, and rushed straight at Artyom. "What is this circus?" His voice broke into a shout. "This is my business. My name is on the sign. I found the investors. I negotiated everything. I organized all of this." Artyom looked at him calmly, without anger, without triumph, without pity, with the expression of a doctor studying an X-ray that confirms exactly what he suspected. "Your name on the sign is a marketing decision. That sign, by the way, will be replaced soon. As for your share in the project, it's 12%, as stated in Section 4, Clause 42 of the investment agreement you signed. You are a lawyer, Dmitri Sergeyevich. You did read what you were signing, didn't you?" Dmitri stood in the middle of the room, under 70 pairs of eyes, in his new suit, in his polished shoes, and couldn't say a word. He hadn't read it. He had trusted the attractive numbers, Regina's admiration, his own impatience, and that inner voice that had followed him all his life, whispering that he was special, that he deserved more, that everything would somehow work itself out. Regina tugged at his sleeve. "Dima," she hissed. "Dima, do something. Call a lawyer. Say it's fraud. Tell them." But Dmitri stood there in silence, because he was a lawyer, a careless one, overconfident, but still a lawyer. And he understood that a signed contract was a signed contract, and there was nothing left to do. Ksenia didn't stage a public humiliation. She hadn't planned a scene at all. Dmitri himself had called Artyom to the microphone, craved the spotlight, built the stage for his own exposure. She simply picked up her bag from the chair where she had left it at the beginning of the evening, nodded to Rustam standing by the bar with a glass in his hand. He raised it slightly in her direction and headed for the exit. Artyom walked beside her, half a step behind, his palm resting lightly on her back, not guiding, not pushing, just marking his presence. Behind them, the murmur grew louder. Someone was trying to calm Dmitry down. Someone else was already dialing numbers to retell what they had just witnessed. Others stood frozen, mouths open. Regina was shouting something after Ksenia, but she didn't catch the words and didn't try to. The doors of the hall closed behind them with a soft click. Outside, the air was cool. The October evening smelled of wet leaves and exhaust. A street lamp above the hotel entrance spilled a yellow circle onto the sidewalk, and in that light, the last autumn insects drifted slowly. Ksenia stopped and took a deep breath. The air felt clean, or maybe it only seemed that way after the stuffy hall, heavy with perfume, people, and the smell of catered snacks. Artyom stood beside her, took his phone from his pocket, glanced at the screen, and slipped it back. "Are you okay?" he asked. Ksenia turned to him. The lamp lit half her face, and in that glow she looked younger, softer than she had inside. "Yes," she said, then repeated it quietly, as if testing the word. "Yes." Finally, they stood in silence for a minute. A couple walked past with a dog, a small Spitz tugging at the leash trying to sniff Artyom's shoe. The owner apologized and pulled the dog back. Artyom smiled and bent down to scratch the dog behind the ear. Ksenia watched and thought that this was how you really understand a person, not from speeches or investment agreements, but from the way he bends down to greet a stranger's small dog on a sidewalk at 10 in the evening. Artyom called one taxi for both of them. They rode in silence. Ksenia watched the city lights slide past the window and realized that for the first time in a very long while, she felt neither emptiness nor relief. It was something else, quiet, steady joy, like a foundation solid enough to build walls on. The restructuring took 3 weeks. The fund's lawyers worked quickly and cleanly. The studio was renamed. Where Regina Beauty once stood, a concise S studio appeared. The logo changed, the sign was replaced, the website was updated. Ksenia took over management and moved into the very office where, just a month earlier, Dmitry had welcomed guests with champagne and a photo zone. She didn't erase everything. She kept part of the team Dmitry had hired, 2 nail technicians, the administrator, and Tamara Petrovna, the cleaning woman who had worked in the building long before the renovation and knew every corner. She offered Dmitry a part-time position as a legal consultant, contracts, suppliers, client claims. Regina became the morning shift administrator, not out of revenge. Ksenia didn't think in terms of revenge at all. It demanded too much energy better spent elsewhere. There was practicality too. They knew the clients from the first weeks, they knew the processes, they knew the space. And because Ksenia understood one thing Dmitry never had, despite all his years dreaming of business, real power isn't about crushing someone. It's about showing who is actually building. Dmitry didn't show up the first week. He didn't call. He didn't write. He didn't respond to messages from the lawyers. Lena, who picked up news through mutual friends, told Ksenia that he had locked himself inside the house. He wasn't going out. He was drinking. He kept telling Regina he'd been deceived, that it was a setup, that he would sue. Regina, according to Lena, swung between hysterical outbursts and frantic attempts to reach her lawyer. On the 8th day, Dmitry showed up without calling, without warning. He simply opened the studio door at 9 a.m. when Ksenia was sitting at the reception desk with her laptop and a cup of coffee, reviewing appointments for the week. He looked terrible. He was wearing the same suit from the opening, but now it was wrinkled. He hadn't shaved. Dark shadows hung under his eyes. He stopped in the doorway and stared at Ksenia in silence for a long time, like someone staring at the place where his house once stood, only to find a stranger's building there now. Ksenia lifted her head. Their eyes met. "Coffee?" she asked calmly. He sat at the small table by the window. She brought him black coffee, no sugar, just the way he liked it, and set it in front of him. He wrapped both hands around the cup as if trying to warm himself. "Why?" he finally asked. One word, No shouting, no accusations. Just why? Ksenia sat down across from him. Because I know how to build, she said evenly. Dima, I always have. You just never noticed. He didn't answer. He finished his coffee, stood up, placed the cup on the counter, and walked out. The next day, he sent over a signed agreement accepting the position of in-house legal counsel. No comments. Regina lasted 2 months. She arrived every morning at 8 sharp, opened the studio, wiped down the counter, greeted the first clients. She did everything correctly, no complaints, no mistakes. But every time Ksenia walked past, Regina turned away, her shoulders stiffening like stone. 2 months later, she placed her resignation on the desk and left without saying goodbye. She couldn't bear that the woman she once considered defeated was now signing her paycheck. 6 months later, the network had expanded to 3 locations. Ksenia chose each one herself. She visited the neighborhoods, counted foot traffic, spoke with neighboring shop owners, stood on sidewalks with a notebook tracking how many women passed during rush hour. Artyom would laugh. You have analysts. They can do that. Analysts see numbers, she would reply. I want to see people. After a year, there were 7 locations. Ksenia ran the business the way she knew how, calmly, methodically, with attention to every number and every person within the system. She paid her technicians above market rate and introduced bonuses for returning clients. She sent administrators to service training courses. For Tamara Petrovna, the cleaning lady, she bought a quality tea set for her birthday and included a handwritten card. Later, Tamara Petrovna told the others, now that's what I call an owner. Not like the previous one. He just walked around waving his hands. Artyom stood beside Ksenia, not as a savior, not as a patron, not as a man who bought a business instead of a bouquet, but as a partner, as someone who saw in her what Dmitri never did, not a muse, not a shadow, not a foundation for someone else's ambitions. A builder, someone who could turn numbers into walls, walls into a system, and a system into life. 8 months after that evening at the hotel, they began living together. There were no dramatic announcements, no ceremonial moving trucks, no formal dinners. One night, Ksenia simply stayed over. In the morning, she found that he had bought her favorite tea and placed a pot with a violet on the kitchen counter. She looked at the violet, then at him. Are you serious? She asked. Absolutely, he replied. A year after the opening, Lena came over one evening. They sat in Artyom's large, bright apartment overlooking the river, drinking wine in the kitchen. Lena, as always, asked directly, didn't you feel sorry for him? At that moment when he was standing at the microphone and realized everything? Ksenia slowly turned her glass in her hands. Outside, a riverboat drifted by, faint music echoing across the water. I did, she said quietly. For a second, maybe 2. I saw his face, and I felt sorry for him. We were together 8 years. She paused. Then I remembered the bank statement, the suburban hotel, $12,000 a night, the jewelry store, $34,000, the ring he bought. Not for me. Her expression hardened, but her voice remained steady. And the pity disappeared, not because I'm cruel, but because he received exactly what he earned. No more, no less. She watched as the boat disappeared around the bend in the river. You know what's almost funny, Len? He still thinks I did it out of revenge, that I spent years plotting to humiliate him. But I didn't. I just built the business I wanted. The one he sketched on napkins for 8 years. She let out a quiet breath. The difference is, he was dreaming. I was calculating and building, and the fact that he ended up inside it, that was his choice. He walked onto someone else's foundation. Like he always did, Lena said nothing. Then she raised her glass. To the foundation, she said. Ksenia smiled and clinked her glass against hers. Outside, the capital shimmered with millions of lights. The river carried their reflections toward the horizon. On the windowsill, beside the empty glasses, stood the violet, its purple petals fully open, alive.